Wrapping up SEC Media Days here in Nashville, I'm joined by our Georgia beat writer, Chip Towers. Chip, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this week is Georgia is kind of the new Goliath in the SEC and the college football sphere overall.
Yeah, I mean, there's not any question. I would say Georgia kind of dominated the conversation here in Nashville all week. I mean, whether it was Alabama players being asked about it, Brian Kelly at LSU, made it very clear that that's who we're trying to catch up with. So I know Kirby and the Bulldogs don't really like it, but they are very much the hunted this year. They're the standard by which all the other teams in the league are measuring themselves, and that was kind of a point of conversation all week long.
It seems like Georgia definitely is the new standard, and it's easy to see why. One topic that did come up a couple times is how slim the margin for error is for Georgia this season, given how easy that schedule is. When you look at the kind of factors the College Football Playoff Committee looks at, I mean, you got Ball State on the schedule. It is a relatively easy schedule.
Yeah, Ball State, UT Martin, and UAB. I mean, it is a very light schedule, and I guess that's, if there's any pressure, that's where it is. Georgia needs to be perfect through the season, and there are some pretty good challenges in there. Tennessee, one of the last teams up here, there's a lot of excitement about them. You got to go to their place. You got to go to Auburn. Who knows what Hugh Freeze and them are going to have waiting for them. So there are little challenges packed in there, but the strength of schedule is there's nowhere for that to go up really until you get into the postseason. The key is getting there with a clean slate. I think Georgia can do it, but that's always easier said than done.
One guy we heard from this week from Georgia is Kamari Lassiter, who I thought was a hit at Media Days. And, one thing Georgia coach Kirby Smart did acknowledge when he was asked about, is there anything you want to see Georgia improve on from last year? It's a short list because the Bulldogs were obviously perfect last season on paper, was pass defense. Some things that you think Georgia, if anything, can improve on this season?
Well, I think defense overall is going to be a strength for Georgia, but, it's been interesting because during, SEC Media Days on the SEC Network at night, they replay a lot of games. And so in the past week, I've seen both the LSU game and the Ohio State game in the Peach Bowl. And I tell you, when you go back and watch it, I know Kirby, it's really distressing to see those defensive backs really chasing rather than covering guys. And guys were really open. So they have to shore up pass defense. I think they can. There's a lot of experimentation going on back there, but one of the constants, as you alluded to, is Kamari Lassiter. I think they have a leader in Kamari Lassiter. I think they have a leader in Javon Bullard. The question is, Javon Bullard, is he going to be at nickel or safety? I have a feeling he's going to end up at safety. And, Dan Jackson coming up, and then whoever settles the other cornerback position, they ought to be solid at the start of the season, but they must be improved. And now the rest of the defense, I think, is awesome, and I think defense is going to be the strength of the 2023 team because Georgia, like many other teams in this league, is in a quarterback competition and still, unknown how that's going to go. I think defense is going to dictate how good Georgia's going to be this year, and I think that defense is going to be really good. So put that together, and there's your conclusion.
Let's flip to the offense a little bit, because one thing that's going to be very different for Georgia this season is you don't have Stetson Bennett, who's been such a big presence for you the last 2 years, the last two national championships. You've got Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift at quarterback. I talked to center Cedric Van Pran on Tuesday at Media Days, and I asked him, what's different working with those two guys than with Stetson? And he was like, well, it is an adjustment, but he bragged on Kirby Smart making sure he and Gunnar Stockton too, all three of those guys a ton of reps. What do you expect from Georgia's offense this season?
I don't know what to expect, to be quite honest with you, because, the quarterback dictates so much. I thought the most interesting thing that I heard from Kirby Smart during their session on Tuesday was him talking about how closely he was going to monitor the reps in the quarterback competition, because when you think about it, he said we might not have gotten it right on Stetson Bennett. It took us a long time to finally get around to him, and that was because the season that he actually ended up in 2021 becoming the starter, Stetson, he was not getting the 1 and 2 reps at all. He was getting the leftovers in the third team offense reps. He wants to make sure that doesn't happen in this competition, so he's having Mike Bobo give him a report every day. What was the percentage breakdown of reps with the number one offense? Now, I expect Carson Beck to start the first game. He's earned it. He's been here the longest. He has by far the most experience. So he's going to get the first game. But this competition, there's no rush. Kirby and them said, it's going to go on into the season and ultimately will be determined by how gameplay goes. So it's a long time to that, and it's really, as you alluded to earlier, it's a while before Georgia gets to the really meaningful, anxiety-ridden game. So it's going to take a while before this works out.
Arkansas coach Sam Pittman is always a hit. Florida, Georgia's dominated Florida the last few years, but that's always a tough rivalry. Alabama coach Nick Saban was asked about Georgia. I think it's funny whenever people talk about Bama having a down year. They didn't win it all. I guess that constitutes a down year. But the bar is so high for them. What were your biggest takeaways from what the other guys had to say this week?
Well, you alluded to Sam Pittman. I'd give him MVP, certainly for most entertaining. I mean, he's just so genuine. It doesn't matter if you're asking him about beer or his playlist or he's not taken aback by it, and really takes time to answer. He was very entertaining. I wish the best for Arkansas this year. You're still in divisions, so he's still got to come out of that West, which means you got to get by Alabama and LSU and all those others. So, the Alabama thing was interesting. A couple of years ago when Alabama lost to Georgia in the national championship game, kind of the narrative out of Tuscaloosa, which was set by Nick Saban, was that they were in a rebuilding year.
Yeah.
So you could kind of argue, okay, well, what about last year? Were you still in a rebuilding year? And what about this year? If you look at it, there's a lot of rebuilding going on in Tuscaloosa right now. You got 3 new coaches, 2 new coordinators, new quarterback. They have one of the smallest returning percentages of production offensively and defensively in the country. I didn't realize that until we got here this week. So, Alabama's got some work to do, too. Brian Kelly said they're not ready to compete with Georgia yet. I don't know whether he's being, disingenuous there or not, but, it really sounds like, Georgia's being chased. I thought Florida and Billy Napier, weren't necessarily dynamic in their session. And, I came out of it like they don't have a clue on the quarterback situation, and their options aren't great based on what I'm seeing. So, I definitely think it's a 3 or 4 team battle this year, and everybody's chasing Georgia.
How high is the bar for Georgia? Georgia has established itself as such a dominant force in college football, but now you almost look at the schedule and would it be a letdown if Georgia loses a game?
Yeah, no, that's where you get, and that's kind of where you are with Alabama, right? I mean, everybody's talking about what's wrong with Alabama. They won 11 games last year. If you can average 11 games, you're doing pretty good.
You're doing excellent.
Yeah. And let's face it, for Georgia, I mean, it's been 90 years since almost a century since anybody's won 3 straight national championships, and you could argue that Minnesota, which did it, 1935 to 37,
34, 35, 36.
She knows. It's been since the 1930s. They're doing something really, really special in the playoff era. Really, since the BCS era, there's been several who have tried. Many have failed. But so that's where you get when you win back-to-back national championships. That first year you don't, everybody's going to be disappointed.
Well, that wraps up our coverage from SEC Media Days here in Nashville. Thank you so much for following along, and make sure you continue to do so as the 2023 season draws near.